What if Arsenal's biggest transfer conversation right now isn't actually about Gabriel Martinelli? Because something very interesting has happened today. Arsenal and Galatasaray are already talking about Martinelli. They're talking about Ethan Nwaneri. Galatasaray have reportedly put around £38.4 million on the table for Martinelli, but somewhere inside those negotiations, Victor Osimhen's name has appeared, and that changes everything. Because this could be much more than Arsenal simply asking about a striker. It could be the beginning of one of the most unexpected transfer stories of the summer. So let's break down exactly what is happening, what Arsenal could be considering, and why this situation could become very complicated. Let's start with the facts. According to the Telegraph's Matt Law, Arsenal and Galatasaray have been holding wider discussions over potential transfers involving Gabriel Martinelli and Ethan Nwaneri. Galatasaray have reportedly made an offer of around £38.4 million for Martinelli. They have also indicated an interest in Ethan Nwaneri, who spent the second half of last season on loan at Marseille. But during these negotiations, another name entered the conversation: Victor Osimhen. Now, there is an important distinction here. This does not mean Arsenal have agreed a deal for Osimhen. It does not mean Osimhen is definitely joining Arsenal. And it certainly does not mean Martinelli or Nwaneri will automatically be used as part of a swap. At this stage, we're talking about discussions and Arsenal exploring the situation. But the fact that Osimhen's availability has even been raised is what makes this story so fascinating, because Arsenal already have a major attacking option in Viktor Gyökeres. So why would Arsenal even ask about Victor Osimhen? That's the first big question. And there are several possible answers. First, Arsenal may simply be exploring the market. Top clubs don't wait until a deal is guaranteed before they investigate possibilities. If one of Europe's elite strikers becomes potentially available, you ask the question, you find out the price, you find out the player's situation, you find out whether a deal is even realistic, and only then do you decide whether to move forward. Second, Arsenal may see Osimhen as an opportunity that wasn't expected to exist. Remember, Osimhen is not some unknown prospect. He's a proven goal scorer who has already demonstrated that he can perform at the highest level, and Galatasaray are now the club sitting across the negotiating table. That creates an interesting dynamic, because Arsenal aren't trying to negotiate with a completely unrelated club. They're already talking to Galatasaray, and that means conversations can expand very quickly. One negotiation becomes two becomes three, and suddenly Osimhen is being discussed. Now, let's talk about Gabriel Martinelli, because this might actually be the key to understanding everything. Galatasaray reportedly want Martinelli and have put approximately £38.4 million on the table. And from Arsenal's perspective, this creates a difficult decision. Martinelli has been at Arsenal since 2019. He's won major honours with the club. He's scored important goals. He's provided pace, direct running, and attacking threat. But football is also about squad evolution, and Arsenal now have serious competition for attacking positions. So the question isn't simply, is Martinelli a good player? He obviously is. The real question is Martinelli still central to Arsenal's next phase? And that's a completely different question. If Arsenal believe Martinelli is no longer an automatic starter, then a substantial offer becomes something they have to consider, especially if the money can be reinvested into another area. But here's where things become really interesting, because if Arsenal sell Martinelli and then potentially explore Osimhen, the conversation changes from simply selling a winger to potentially restructuring the attack. And then there's Ethan Nwaneri, because this is the part Arsenal fans need to watch very carefully. Galatasaray have also shown interest in Nuaneri. The teenager spent the second half of last season on loan at Marseille, gaining valuable first-team experience. And now Galatasaray are reportedly interested. For Arsenal, this is potentially much more sensitive than the Martinelli situation because Nuaneri represents the future. He's one of those players Arsenal supporters don't simply want to see sold. They want to see developed. They want to see him become part of the first team story. So if Galatasaray are asking about Martinelli and Nuaneri, Arsenal have to decide what kind of deal makes sense. A permanent sale, a loan with an option, a loan with an obligation, or simply a discussion that goes nowhere. And according to reports, these negotiations have been taking place alongside the Osimhen conversation. That's why this story is bigger than one transfer. Now let's address the question every Arsenal fan is asking. Could Arsenal actually sign Victor Osimhen? Yes, it's possible, but possible doesn't mean probable, and we need to be very careful here. The current reporting tells us that Arsenal have asked about his availability. That's significant. But there is still a huge distance between asking a question and completing a transfer. The finances would obviously be enormous. Osimhen is a premium striker. His contract situation, wages, transfer valuation, and Galatasaray's willingness to sell would all have to be considered. And Arsenal would also have to decide what role Osimhen would actually play in the squad. Because remember, Viktor Gyökeres is already there. So would Arsenal really spend heavily on another elite striker? Would Osimhen compete directly with Gyökeres? Would one of them play alongside the other? Or is Arsenal simply investigating an opportunity before deciding whether it makes sense? These are the questions we don't have answers to yet. And that's why anyone telling you that Osimhen is already an Arsenal player is getting ahead of the evidence. But here's the scenario I find most interesting. Imagine Arsenal are looking at the situation from a completely different angle. Galatasaray want Martinelli. Galatasaray are interested in Nuaneri. Arsenal want to understand Osimhen's situation. That means both clubs have something the other club wants, and whenever that happens, negotiations become much more complicated. Could Martinelli's valuation become part of a wider financial structure? Could another player become involved? Could Arsenal use the negotiations simply to gain information about Osimhen? Could Galatasaray use Arsenal's interest in Osimhen to improve their position on Martinelli? Absolutely, that's how elite transfer negotiations work. And this is why you should not immediately assume this is a straight swap. There is currently no confirmed agreement saying Martinelli plus money for Osimhen. What we know is that Osimhen's availability has been discussed, and that alone is enough to make this one of the most fascinating developments surrounding Arsenal right now. Personally, Arsenal need to be extremely careful. If the club genuinely believes Martinelli is no longer central to the project, then £38.4 million is an offer worth seriously evaluating, but selling Martinelli only makes sense if Arsenal have a clear plan for replacing what he gives the team. And when it comes to Nuaneri, I would be even more cautious because selling a young player before discovering his full potential can become one of the most expensive mistakes a football club makes. Arsenal have spent years building an academy capable of producing elite talent. Nuaneri is exactly the kind of player you want to develop, so if Galatasaray want him, Arsenal should demand extremely strong conditions. And if Osimhen genuinely becomes available, then Arsenal need to ask one final question. Is he actually the player who makes this squad better? Not simply the bigger name, not simply the more exciting transfer, the better footballing decision. So here's where we stand. Arsenal and Galatasaray are talking. Martinelli is wanted, Nuaneri is wanted, and Victor Osimhen's name has entered the conversation. That's confirmed by the current reporting, but an Osimhen transfer is not confirmed, and that distinction is incredibly important. Still, if Arsenal are genuinely exploring the possibility of bringing Osimhen to North London, then we could be looking at something much bigger than a routine transfer negotiation, because Arsenal may be preparing for another major change to their attack. And if that happens, the Martinelli story may only be the beginning. So, Arsenal fans, let me ask you this. Would you sell Gabriel Martinelli for around £38 million if it helped Arsenal sign Victor Osimhen? Or should Arsenal keep Martinelli and forget about Osimhen? Tell me your answer in the comments, because this one could get very interesting very quickly.